yard, only about maybe 100 yards from the house. And he thought, why in the world would there be green grass growing here where everything is so arid, everything is dry? So he said, if there's green grass there must be moisture somewhere. So he went to the shed or the barn there and got a shovel and began to dig. It seemed like the further he went down, the wetter the soil got. After about 4 feet, well, he finally decided there's water in there, it must be. And then he summoned several of the Indians to help him. They dug down about 8 feet more, and sure enough, they discovered a spring of water. And that water was so sweet. It was the sweetest, known as the sweetest water in the area. And not only that, but there was an abundance of it. Whenever we had camp meetings, they would haul buckets of water, and the path was just wet, where they were taking this water from this well. It was inexhaustible. So that was another performance of a miracle that happened in the mission, and was also always viewed by the mission, by the Indian people. They thought that certainly must be a godsend, that God would open up a well. And I understand even up to this day, there still is that same well, a spring of water. Then there's another incident from my own experience. When I was a young lad there at the mission, I'd say about 5 years old, I was always playing with paper money. We had coupons and things like that, and so there was one of the Indians. He was a very friendly one, and he used to come to the house quite often. And one day he took me on his lap, and I had this money, and he'd say to me, I think his name was Hishikona, if my memory bears right, it's Hishikona. And when I was showing him the money, he would say, "Sought the money, sought the money." That meaning is you're going to have lots of money, and then he said, someday you're going to have lots of money. So, then there was, of course, other instances that I remember quite well. One of them was when, this is about 1904 or 5 along in there, well, my mother wasn't very well, so they decided to leave the Indian mission. And we moved to a place called Godebo, which is some distance from there. And during that time, the chieftain Quanah Parker had died. And when he heard about that, my father went to his funeral, and of course it was his privilege then to speak to the Indians and preach the funeral service. When he got there, he noticed the grave was quite small. And of course they were disappointed because they did want to put some of his regalia, which he had a lot of. He had an abundance of beautiful, beautiful regalia, as the Indians would have. And he wanted to put some of that into the grave. Well, of course, they had to enlarge the grave, and after the grave was enlarged, many of the Indians, they stood around, and of course they were all weeping, very sad. And I was at that time, I guess, about 7 years old, and I remember this sermon that my father preached to them. He says, "Why do you weep? Why do you weep? He has gone into heaven, where there will be no tears. He will wipe away all tears, and there will only be joy in heaven. Why do you weep?" Well, that was quite a comfort to them, and that sermon alone brought many of them to the experience of the gospel of Jesus Christ to them. Then another instance where the Indian people, they loved music. And of course they had no musical instruments. Most of their music instrument was drums and such as that. And of course by that time we had already built the chapel or the church. And then we had an organ in that church, an old, we call it a pump organ. And a man by the name of Mr. Bull, who was the organist. And then he would lead the singing. And all those Indians would just love to hear that music. And there was one song particularly that we would sing for the Indians, and they enjoyed, and that was, in the Indian language, is Kimamawa Katu Jesus, Kimamawa Katu Jesus, Osinohi Christi, Osinohi Christi. That means, come to Jesus, He will save you just now. See? And of course, that message always rung to them, and they, oh, how they loved to hear Mr. Bull play that organ. There was another instance. My father would call on some of the Indians, and one time he went to one of the Indian villages, and it was just about noon. And of course they invited him into their, their home and asked him to sit down and have a meal with them. Of course their meal consisted mostly of what they call a mesquite bean meal, which was a bean that grew on a tree, and of course cornmeal and such as that. Well, my father was plagued with a bad stomach. He had a very, very bad and a weak stomach, and he could only eat in certain foods. So when they invited him to eat, well, then the first thing he thought about, well, my bad stomach. But he said, I have to make a testimony here. So he prayed for the food and thanked God for the food and asked him to strengthen his body so he could serve the Indians better and longer. Well, he began eating this food, this bean and also the corn. And to this day, my father, after even as long as he lived, at 65 years old, he never once complained about stomach trouble, never once. So there was another incident of healing, which was a good testimony to the Indians.
Out were taken in 1945. You just saw Oscar Yellow Wolf and a friend. Here we see the grandmothers carrying their grandchildren on their back in traditional Indian fashion. Some of you no doubt recognize yourself when you were small. The younger ladies are leading the older ladies from the church to the dining hall. The gentleman leaning over and talking to a friend is Deacon Hoto from the Dio Mission. You see Felix Covino sitting down with his mother. Here he leads his mother from the church to the dining hall. We have Brother Pachica and forgot the name of the gentleman. Flora Roach is doing her housework in the tent during the camp meeting. Post Oak Mission Church in 1945, when we came to the mission, these 4 boys are entering the church where the service will begin in a short while. Here you see some of the girls coming for a refreshing drink to the water fountain. Every year we had camp meetings. Our people camped on the mission grounds during the week of meetings. The big top was set up in front of the church so that we could use the steps and porch as the stage. The church benches were set up inside the tent. 2 brothers, Joe Gomez and James Shabata. This view shows the big top set up next to the church, ready for the camp meeting to begin. Flying the U.S. flags during service was one of the traditions. When we came to Post Oak, we continued this practice. In preparation for camping during the meetings, many of our people built brush arbors. Here Oscar Yellow Wolf is building his arbor. Green saplings were cut, set into holes in the ground, then bent into place and tied together to form the framework. When the framework was finished, it was covered with branches and the arbor was complete. Barbecued beef and Indian fried bread were on the menu and is here being prepared. Tope, who outlived her husband, Chief Quanah Parker, was a member of our church. Lily, Paikati, and Agnes are cutting up barbecued meat for the dinner meal soon to be enjoyed by everyone. Not all the meat was barbecued. Some was cut into strips and dried for beef jerky. Perry Heath enjoying some of the barbecued beef and fried bread. Another family gathering around the table to enjoy the delicious food. The camp meetings are in session. A.J. Becker is preaching while Felix Covino is interpreting for him. Here Dr. Muncie from Kansas City is preaching and Felix is interpreting for him. When the camp meetings are over, the chores of moving home are in place. Hey Max, here Max has a trailer for moving his camping gear home. 1945 marks the end of World War II. During the war years, the old cars had worn out, new cars were not available, used cars were very costly. Transportation became a problem. The mission board bought a used bus to bring people to and from church. That station wagon was also used for this purpose. Every summer we conduct a daily vacation Bible school. Here the children are being brought for Bible instruction. The station wagon arrives first. Next, the bus arrives with a load of happy youngsters. That girl with the blonde pigtails is Carol Ann. Last of all comes the driver, yours truly. Dixie Dean Picotti, a lovely Comanche maiden. Billy Joe Bigbow. The last day of the 2-week Bible school was picnic day. Here the students and teachers are walking to the pond located in the pasture behind the dining hall. The teachers this year were Jean Radney, Elvina Bowes, Dorothy Pankratz, and Linda Gerbrandt. At the pond, a bench was set up for food. Wieners and buns, chips, pickles, and so on, and a broiler full of Kool-Aid. The food must be sampled by the teachers. The food line has formed, starting with the smallest. Everyone is given a plate with food. Some wishing to roast their wieners do